Good morning, everybody. My name is Brittany Ufili. I'm the Educational and Outreach Coordinator here at Verteks. We also have Steve Hall, one of our senior engineers that has been with Verteks for going on 19 years now. He's going to be covering our webinar today. We're going to be going over Mitel tips and tricks. We're going to cover some call recording features and a little bit of reporting as well. If you guys have any questions, make sure that you go into the question and chat window, and we'll try to integrate them into the webinar as best as possible. So with that, Steve, it's all yours.
Hey, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Brittany. As Brittany said, today we're going to be taking a look at one of Mitel's advanced applications. It's an add-on for your Mitel Connect system called the Mitel Call Recorder. Mitel Call Recorder is a kind of a basic call recording platform that obviously records calls for you. It's very cost effective, easy to administer, and I'll show you some of the setup details of that, some of the administration options, and then finally how to retrieve your call recordings. Actually, let me jump on the slideshow here and so yeah, a few details today. Obviously, the main call recorder components. There are essentially 4 main components to the call recorder that we need to be aware of. There's the primary call recorder service. That is going to be something that runs on one of your Windows ShoreTel servers, typically a DVS server, an additional voicemail server on your system. And that's the part that actually does the call recording. Now, in large environments or in geographically dispersed environments, you can have multiple call recorder servers in your configuration to either spread the load or to record calls closer to where those calls are taking place so that they're not being sent across WAN links to other locations. So that's the primary component of the call recorder. The next is a tool called the Call Recorder Admin. That's the tool that lets you get in and configure the settings for the call recorder service, what calls to record, and kind of where to put them when they're recorded. That tool can be installed. It's typically installed on the call recording servers, but it can also be installed on any computer that can reach the call recording servers. So in a lot of cases, it might make sense to install that on your own desktop if you're the admin of the system, and it's just easier to have handy there. The next one is the Call Recorder Player website. That is a website that's installed that allows you or a user or supervisors to go in and view the call recordings, and we'll look at that as well as some other recording retrieval options. And then the final piece, another optional piece, is the Call Recorder Client. If you have a need to allow your users to control the call recording, whether or not to initiate a call recording on demand or to stop a call recording if they need to, or to pause a call recording. Sometimes the pause and resume is used in a situation where you might have a call that is giving out credit card numbers and you don't want to record that portion of the call. So a user could pause the recording and resume the recording after the credit card transaction is done. So those are the 4 components: the main call recording service, the admin tool. Those are both required, and then the 2 optional components are the Call Recorder Player and the Call Recorder Desktop Client. Director configuration requirements. I'm going to get in and show you in Director some of the settings that you need to have in place to get the call recorder working. The call recording profile options. Those are how you actually designate which calls you'd like to record, who can view them, and how to save them. Of course, the Call Recorder Client we mentioned, and the call recording retrieval options. There's the built-in player, and then there's a couple other tools that I'm going to show you. So with that, I'm going to pull up my Director, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with the Mitel Connect Director. When it comes to the call recorder, one of the first things you need to have is what's called a surrogate extension, which is the one that the call recorder service actually uses to initiate the call recordings. So in our system, we have that down here with the Z call recorder, to put it at the bottom of the list. And it's an extension, has no phone, doesn't need a phone or anything. It lives on our call recorder server. It doesn't need a Connect Client license. It's just phone only. The important thing about that is the user group that it's a member of. So this is in a user group down here called Call Recorder, and that Call Recorder is a member of a class of service here. So we'll take a look at user groups. The Call Recorder is using the telephony class of service, also called Call Recorder. And if I take a look at that, the very important thing that we need to look for here is the fact that it has the permission here to record others' calls, and it has the checkbox here for allow initiation. So we have to have that on the Call Recorder surrogate extension. And then back to our list of users, we can see that we have most of our users are in this user group called VCI users. I can also get to that user group by just clicking here. I can see that VCI users is using the class of service called fully featured. So if I click that to go into that class of service, I can see that down here under the call recording section, that this user group is configured to accept call recording requests from that extension 1152Z call recorder. So those two things need to be in place for the call recorder service to be able to have the correct permissions to record the calls. Once the call recorder user here has the permission to record the call, it does hand it off to a route point that also has to be configured. And the primary consideration for the route point, two really, is one, the server that it lives on. It has to live on your call recording server, the one that's running the call recording service. And then the call stack depth should equal or be greater than the number of call recording licenses that you have for the call recorder service. The call recorder service is licensed on a concurrent basis, so the number of calls it can record at any one time. So you could, for example, have a phone system that has maybe 100 users, but only 25 phone lines, because not everyone's going to be on the phone at the same time. So in that case, you would only need 25 call recorder licenses, because you're never going to have more than 25 of your users on a external outside call using one of those phone lines. That's also one of the details to be aware of with this call recording solution, and really most call recording solutions, is that they only record calls that involve a trunk or a phone line, meaning they're connected to someone outside of the phone system. So it will not record, extension to extension calls, unless it's, again, a conference call that involves an outside line. And so that's the route point. Those are the two primary considerations inside of the director that you need to be aware of to get the call recorder working, or if you're having any trouble with the call recording, those are the first couple things to check inside of director. All right, the next thing I want to bring up is the actual call recorder admin. So when you have this installed, you'll have this icon here for the call recorder admin. I'm going to open that up. And in here, if you do have multiple call recorder servers, you can add them in here. So I just have one right here, which is pointed to this server name. Shows me that I'm connected. I can come in here and I can go to the settings for this server. And it pulls up this additional window here. First thing I'll show you is the server settings. So these settings apply to everything that the service on this call recorder server is going to do. So the first thing I have is how many licenses are applied to this server. So once again, I said earlier that you could have multiple call recording servers in your organization. If you do, then you need to allocate the total number of licenses you have purchased. You need to break those up and apply those to the servers in a way that makes sense to you. So if you've got 25 trunks at location A and 25 trunks at location B, you're probably going to want to buy 50 call recorder licenses and apply 25 to each server if you have a call recorder server in both locations. Because when the call recording service starts up, it's going to request and hold on to that many licenses. So if you kind of request all of them, then the second call recorder server is not going to be able to get kind of its fair share. Here's the route point and the record extension that we looked at in Director. That's where we specify those. So each call recorder server needs to have those. Most of the other stuff is pretty obvious. Your extension length, trunk access code. You do have log settings. If you're troubleshooting anything, you can actually change what level of logging we're running so that we can get more details. Record settings, minimum recording length. If a call is less than 2 seconds, that's probably not a real call. It's a busy signal or something, and you can reject that. Max recording length, there really is no necessarily an upper limit, but just for space requirements, you may not want to record calls that go on for hours. It might have been somebody calling into a webinar or something like that, and maybe no point in keeping those. The root file storage path. So this is where you actually put the call recording files that are generated when you record. In this case, we have it going to a folder on the server. You can have it go to like a UNC file share path if you need to. That's especially useful if you have multiple call recording servers and you want to write those files back to a unified location. Wait for the far end to answer on outbound calls. That just kind of eliminates having to hear some of the ringing that takes place when calls are getting set up. Silent recording by default is enabled on here. So what that means is the system does have the ability to play a periodic beep when a call is being recorded, if you want to have the system do that. In our case, we have silent recording on by default, which means it does not play that periodic beep when a call is being recorded. It's kind of a soft tone that plays every, 15 seconds maybe. But we have that turned off. The next option there is the customer stop recording key, which we don't have enabled, but again, that's a setting that you can enable where a caller into your system can press a button on their keypad to stop the recording. So you can announce that option and allow the outside party to control whether or not they want to have that call recorded. And then archive settings. We'll look at this a little bit more later, but on the server, there is a server archive age when the archive triggers, and that triggers when a call recording is 180 days old. But what actually happens at that time is controlled by the individual call recording profiles, which we haven't gotten to yet. And also kind of what time that archive runs and what it's going to do if we're archiving and backing up those files, where it's going to put them. So those are the server settings that apply to this call recording server. And I'm going to say cancel that. I don't think I changed anything there. And then I'm going to look at, so that was server settings. Now I'm going to look at our call recording profiles. Now in our system, we just have the one call recording profile, record all calls. This one's pretty straightforward. You can have different call recording profiles built for maybe different departments, maybe different types of calls. One feature I like to point out is that maybe you want to have a call recording profile that records anybody who were to dial 911. Maybe you want to get a recording of that call. So you could have a call recording profile that records, inbound calls to your sales group and, maybe outbound calls from a marketing campaign or something like that. You're not recording all calls, but you can also set up a call recording profile to record, any call to a specific number, like in that example, 911 maybe. And so you can have many different call recording profiles targeted at different types of calls. And the way that works is by either adding or editing. I'm going to edit this particular call recording profile and look at those options. All right, so this is our call recording profile named Record All. Checkbox says it's enabled. And the first thing, the most important thing here is your extensions and ranges to record. So in our case, we have a bunch of things selected here in the box. This is done by selecting the extensions box right here, which pulls up another window here and lets me go down through the list and check off the extensions that I want to have recorded. That's one way to select the extensions you want to have recorded. Another way is you can simply come in here and put in a range. So you don't have to check off any extensions, and I could come in here and I could say I want to record all the extensions from, say, 1401 through 1499, and I could put that into the list. one thing to be aware of is if you only want to have extensions in this list and you use a range, you have to be careful that in your system you don't have any, hunt groups, work groups, auto attendants that are also within that extension range, because then they would trigger the call recording. So that's one reason that you may want to go with using this extensions option here and checking off the extensions rather than using a range. So once you have the extensions selected that you'd like to record, the next option you have here is a record filter. So in the record filter, we can say, do we want to record inbound calls and or outbound calls for this call recording profile? We can also filter by the connected ID. That's essentially the caller ID of the outside party. So we could, or the number dialed. So it could be an inbound, but only calls from a particular number, or if you dial out to a particular number, that filter is going to catch those calls. So that's an example where you could use the 911 example. If you just wanted to record calls to 911, you could select that filter and add in 911 there. And then is it, record callers who are not in the list, which makes it kind of an inverse list, or record calls with empty connected IDs, the caller ID blocked, that sort of thing. Filter by call property. There are several call properties that get tagged on an inbound call, and there's a document that kind of lists what all those might be, and you can filter. That's usually a more advanced filtering feature, but you can filter calls based on whether they hit a particular entity in the system, came through a particular route, that sort of thing. The next one is filter by group. If you have that selected, you can filter calls that come through a particular, if you have contact center, one of the contact center route points that sends the calls to one of your contact center groups, or if you have work groups or hunt groups. Again, you can use the extension range option, or you can hit the button to check off individual groups. That looks like here I can check off all my hunt groups. Or if I know all my hunt groups are in the 1500 range, I can put in an extension range for that to just record that range. DNS again for inbound calls. If you only want to record calls that came in through a particular main number or main numbers, you can add the DNS caller ID or DNS number of those calls, with those main numbers in here, to only record calls that came in via that main line or those main lines. So those are the record filters, basically designating what calls we want to record. So we have our extensions, and then further, once we have the extension selected, inbound, outbound, do we want to put any other filters on that to filter specific calls? Cancel that. Next thing you have is a schedule. If you'd like to have calls only recorded during certain hours, we don't have any schedule built in here, but you can build out a schedule saying, at a particular start time, we're going to start recording calls, and then at a particular time, we're going to stop recording calls. So in this case, it would make sense to have these times maybe like 9 to 5. Active is obviously when it's recording calls, inactive is when it's not. And you can build that out for whatever your needs are. Percentage of calls to record. Most places are just set for 100%. Once you've already made your selection of what calls you want to record them all. But you do have an option there to record a percentage. Maybe you just want to do some sampling of maybe customer service calls, that sort of thing, and you only want to maybe spot check and have half of them available to go through. Once again, it can save on storage space. So you can use that option to record some percentage of those calls that match the filter. Next option here is persistent recording. Persistent recording is a kind of important one to pay attention to, because it can have sometimes some unintended consequences. What persistent recording means is that if a call comes in and is triggered by this call recording profile, so it matches one of the extensions in the list, and it matches whatever we have set for a record filter. In this case, any of the extensions and our call recorder filter, any inbound call or outbound call is going to match. So the call recorder says, start recording that call. Persistent call recording means if that user then transfers that call to someone else, continue recording that call. That's going to continue recording the call even if that other person is not someone who's listed here in the list of extensions to be recorded, and even if the permissions are not set for that user, which we looked at in the Connect director. If those permissions are not set to allow recording that call, it's still going to be able to continue recording because it started under the first user that was eligible to be recorded. When persistent recording is enabled and the call is completed, that call is going to be saved under the name of the first person who kind of triggered that call recording. So if a call came in and Derek was the one who, say, answered the call and triggered this call recording profile to start recording, and then he transfers the call to, myself, Steve, and then he transfers the call to Don. When that call ends, the call recorder is going to make one call recording file, and it's going to be listed under Derek's calls. So that's something to be aware of too. If you uncheck that box and a call is transferred, then on each leg of the transfer, it's going to be kind of reevaluated whether or not it still matches. And so that same example, a call comes into Derek, call recorder profile says, let's record it. So it does. He then transfers it to me. If we don't have persistent call recording enabled, that call recording is complete. When the call is transferred to me, the call recorder then looks at the call again and says, yep, Steve's in the list, so I'm going to start a new call recording, and that call recording will be saved under Steve. So that's how that would work if we did not have persistent call recording enabled. So that's just something to be aware of with that checkbox. Once again, silent recording. We looked at the server defaults earlier, but this one is specific for this call recording profile. So you could have a call recording profile that overrides the server defaults. In this case, we're just letting the server defaults take precedence here. But if we want to, we can say yes or no. And then the customer stop recording key. Do we want to, again, override the server default setting and allow the customers to stop recording when they press a digit on their keypad? The next section here controls the client settings. So the client, the call recorder client, is one of those optional pieces of software that I mentioned, which we will take a look at here shortly. It's a tray application that allows the clients, if we give them these permissions, to be able to do things like maybe initiate a call recording on a call that's not designated to be recorded, or they could not record a call that the call recorder does want to record. And then again, the most common usage is allowing the pause and resume, typically for like credit card information or other personal information that you want to eliminate from call recordings. You can allow the user to control that pause and resume feature. There's also call tagging. That's one we don't see used a lot because it does require the user to be on the ball and get those call tags in there, but you can allow the user to enter in some additional information, and that information can be used as part of the file name for the resulting call recording. So maybe it's a zip code or something if you want to be able to search the call recordings that way, or a particular department or something like that. You can allow the agents using the desktop client to put a tag on the calls, whether or not you prompt for a tag, that sort of thing. And what tags are available is down here. The mask you can only allow, maybe you only allow digits, a certain number of digits, that sort of thing. You can build that out with the mask to control what kind of call tags can be put on a call. So there's the client settings. Finally, there's the save filter. Once again, filter by call property. So we talked about call properties in the record filter. So the record filter takes place at the beginning of the call and evaluates whether or not a particular call property is present, and then engages the call recorder if it is. We can also use call properties at the end of the call when it chooses to save the call to look for a call property, because you could have a call property that maybe was not present when the call started but was present when the call ended, that you want to record the call based, or save the call based on that. Or if not, if it doesn't match it, then you can then not save it. And then finally, the storage settings. So we've decided we're going to record the call. We've decided we're going to save the call. Under File Settings, in this dialog box, we can specify where we want to save the call recordings, and in what kind of folder structure do we want to save those call recordings. So in this example, we have the checkbox checked here to store in a subfolder based on the record profile's name. So we have a recording profile called Record All. So all the call recordings triggered by these settings are going to be in a subfolder called Record All. That's handy if you do have different call recording profiles for different departments and that sort of thing. Then here we have a folder template where we are making more than one subfolder. The first subfolder that we're making under the profile name, Record All, is going to be the user's extension name. And then finally another subfolder of the date, which is going to help us when we go to retrieve those call recordings. This is the folder structure we're going to build out to save them. I like how they give an example down here of kind of what we are building when we do this. So we can see here that we have the C call recordings is where we're saving them. Record All is the profile name. User extension name is a variable that will be filled in, and then date. And then all the rest of this is actually the file name of the WAV file that we're going to create when we record the call. And that's, again, going to have all these different variables that we put in here: the username, user extension, direction, was it an inbound, outbound call, the date, the time, the caller ID on the call, and then finally the GUID, which is a kind of a serial number for the call. It makes it an easy way to track any call through the system through logs or through the call recorder. And so having that GUID present can help us when we're searching for those calls. So we have that tacked on to the file name as well. And as you make changes here, you can see that this example down here is going to change. Maybe I want to have a subfolder added on here for the day of the week. So we can see here that now it's going to show the date, and then it's going to have a folder that says, Thursday, and then under that is where all the WAV files for Thursday will be. So that's how we build the folder structure and the file name structure. One thing that you do want to be aware of is you don't want to get too long with these file names. Windows does have an upper limit of a folder and a total path length. I think it's 260 characters, at which point it'll just fail to create the file, and you won't end up with a call recording there. There's a temp folder that it can be retrieved from, but it's not going to be easy to find that way. So you do want to make sure that you don't get too carried away with these path lengths and file name lengths. Okay, so then again, back to our call recording profile. We've decided what calls to record, where and how to save them. Then finally, we have archive settings. Pull this over here. We don't have these selected on this call recording profile to do any backup, but we do have it selected to delete. So on the server settings, we saw that our archive, I believe, was set for 180 days. So when that runs, it's going to look for all the call recordings that are over 180 days, and then it's going to do what we have selected under this archive settings dialog option here. So the first option here is to back up the files. So if you want to, we can take a copy of those files essentially and move them over to another folder. We can manipulate, again, the folder structure if we want to, with different dates. You got to be careful with that because you can end up creating a lot of duplicate files and folders that way. The backup file format, do you want to do it as a WAV format or an MP3 format? So that is the backup option, or the archive option, where it actually takes those files and takes them out of your primary call recording storage and moves them over to a backup or archive storage location. And then the next option is the delete files, which will purge the files from your system. So you can use the archive setting to either backup or delete, or backup and delete. So the delete means it's going to delete them from the primary folder. So if you're backing them up, you probably do want to go ahead and delete them from the primary storage folder, because otherwise you're just going to make copies. Or if you don't need to archive them and you just want to get rid of them at a certain period of time, you can uncheck backup and just do the delete. And again, once I close out of this, that is controlled by the, actually, cancel, there we go, server settings. The server setting controls when that archive runs and how old those call recordings are when the archive runs to evaluate them. So we're evaluating those calls that are over 180 days old, and that's when we decide whether or not, based on that previous dialogue, to back them up or delete them, or do both, depending on your needs. All right, so that is essentially the two primary, the two required components of the call recording system. You've got the call recorder service, which just gets installed on the server, and you've got to set those that route point and that surrogate extension with the correct class of service. And then you've got the call recorder admin, where you come in here and you designate what calls you want to record. So when you have those two pieces in place, you're now recording calls. The next thing I want to show you is the call recorder client. So we don't need the call recorder admin anymore, but we do need the call recorder client. So let me open that up. And when that's running, that's a tray application, runs with a little, this orange swirl icon down in your system tray. And if you want to, you can open that up. And when you open that up, it shows you a couple, the two most important things down here at the bottom. It shows what phone it's connected to and what record server it's connected to. It does show you some log data, just to kind of show you the recent activity of what's been written to the log. And that's about it when you're not on a call. When you are on a call and we have a call recording profile, that again, and I do just want to refresh that real quick. So I want to take a look at that. Settings, record all. We're going to edit that call recording profile, and I want to make sure I have my client settings to allow the save, no save, pause, resume. Tagging is enabled, so that'll allow us to see those options when we're on a call here in the client. So let me set up a call here. All right, so I have initiated a phone call, which you can see here in my Mitel Connect client. I'm on an active call. And when that call is active, then I get these additional buttons based on the fact that the call recording profile gave me these permissions. I can say, no, I don't want to save this call. I can say I want to pause recording. And then after I'm done with the part that I want to pause, I can resume the recording. And then if I want to, I can click on the tag and insert a call tag there. And that. And those are really the primary functions of the call recorder client. It's a fairly simple tool there. One thing I do want to show here, when the call ends, those buttons are not going to be there, so you won't see them when you're not on a call. or if you don't have permissions to use those features based on the call recording profile. If the call recording profile didn't let me pause, resume, or stop recording, those buttons wouldn't pop up. And then I also have, as a user, I have these settings over here that I can enable or take a look at. Obviously, the server connection, that stuff's going to be filled out. Phone extension doesn't matter unless you're on a, as it says here, a terminal server environment. Maybe I want this client to start every time I log into Windows. That's pretty important, so I'll turn that on if we're using that. And then as a user, if I have the ability, once again, through that call recording profile, to choose not to record a call, instead of having to do that on each and every call, I can go in here and I can actually add in numbers that I don't want to save. So maybe I don't want to save calls that come from my home phone number. I don't need those to get saved. I can go ahead and put that phone number in here and save it, and the system will not save any calls from that number. And then you've got some options here on that tray icon. If I left click on it, I can quickly control the save, no save, or the pause, resume, or the tag, or I can double click on that tray icon to once again pause, resume, or save, no save, or pop up the tag dialog. So that's the call recorder client. It's pretty simple as far as the usage of it. When you do install it, it does require a little bit of setup, because you do have to point it to the correct server, and then you're also going to have to install the Mitel TAPI service provider and configure that as well to get that working. If that's something you want to get going on your system, just let us know and we can help you out with that. But that is the call recorder client. Cancel out of there. Close that. And then finally, the last thing I want to get to is the call recording retrieval option. So we've made these call recordings. We've decided what calls to record. We've allowed our users to do what they need to do. Now finally, we need to be able to retrieve those call recordings. So the second kind of optional piece that comes with the Mitel call recorder is the call recorder player website. That gets installed on one of your typically on one of your call recording servers. It's a website that you can, then log into with your Mitel user ID and password, or if you're using AD integration with your AD account, and it lets you view the call recordings. And actually, let me go back to our call recording profile and show you how that. Because I did not go into the player settings. I missed that. So the player settings controls, for this particular call recording profile, when someone logs into that website, what calls are they allowed to see? So by default, this first checkbox is checked. Users can view and listen to their own recordings. So that means that, any of your users, if you have this selected, can go to that website if they know the URL for that website, log in there, and listen to their own recordings. If you want, you can allow the users to delete their files, download WAV files, the WAV files of the call recordings, play back in the browser as opposed to their phone. I guess they give you that consideration because you could potentially have a lot of users trying to play call recordings, and you can overload the server. There is a limit to about 250 kind of TAPI ports being used on the server. So that's calls being recorded, calls being played. Anytime the server is kind of actively engaged in a call, there's a limit of about 250. That's one of those other reasons why you might want to deploy more than one call recording server if you have a large environment with a lot of users and a lot of trunks. And you might want to limit how many users can be playing back files via the browser all at the same time. And then finally, we have the administrative users who can view all the calls in this call recording profile. The users in the left column here can view the files and can also delete the files. And the administrators in the right column can view all the files, but they do not have the permission to delete the files. So those are kind of how we set the permissions for the call recorder web player. Once we have those set, let me pull up the call recorder web player and show you what that looks like. Got that open here in this tab here. So I've just logged in here to the Mitel Call Recorder player. Shows me who I'm logged in as. And here's the option to either play from the browser, or if I have this selected, play from the phone. So if I have this, when I hit play, it's going to ring my phone. Otherwise, if I don't have this selected, it's just going to use the audio player here in the web browser. Here I can see all the call recordings that I have the ability to view. And it kind of has all these folders kind of expanded by default, so it does generate a pretty long list here. You can collapse these down if you want to find what you're looking for. You can also use the filter up here. So for example, if I just want to see calls that contained 1478, I can put that in here and I can find extension 1478. But then I can also find calls that maybe the caller ID just happened to contain a 1478. But that does give me a much shorter list to go through. And I can come in here and I can take a look at these calls. I can choose to play the file. I can choose to download the file. Or given the permissions that I have here, I can choose to delete the file. This folder structure you see here is the same folder structure that we created when we built the call recording profile file settings. So basically all this browser does is give you a web-based way to view the folder structure. So that is one of the call recording retrieval options. One of the other call recording retrieval options that I like to point out is you can simply set up a file share if you want to. So let me clean up a few of these windows here. And you can simply set up a share on your call recording server if you want to, and use your Windows share permissions to control who can access those call recordings. This one works really well. There's no website required. They can have a map drive to it or whatever makes it easy to get to, a shortcut on the desktop, that sort of thing. And then once again, they can come in here and they can view all the folders, drill down into these calls any particular day, and view all the different call recordings. And from there, obviously, play. They're going to have the option to play, download. And again, this is controlled via the Windows share permissions, whether or not they can delete the files. But this is nice because you can still use the search. So I can come back up here to the top folder here, and I can search again for 1478 and find all the calls for that extension or that contain that 1478. That one works pretty well. The call recorder web player works good in small to medium size environments and some very large environments. According to the guide, if you have over about 250,000 calls in your call recorder, the player website can become slow to respond and give you some trouble. So it's not designed to encompass some of the very largest possible call recording environments. So that's why you might want to transition to using the mapped drive option here, or the folder share option. And then one other way that you can retrieve call recordings is through the Verteks. Verteks is another add-on for your My Voice Connect system that does call reporting, real-time dashboards, and can also integrate, for today's purposes, I want to show the integration with the call recorder. So to view your call recordings through Verteks, you're basically the easiest way. I'm going to run a quick report on a user activity. So I want to see maybe I want to see all the calls for a particular extension. So I'm going to come in here and run a report, user activity detail report, and I can set, how many days back I want to look. Party name is going to be the extension I want to look at here. So I'm going to go to my demo extension here. All right, so here's a report. I went ahead and ran this report for all users. I was on vacation last week, and I don't think my extension was in use yesterday because I was using a demo extension. But I'll go ahead and I'll look at Brian's calls here. So I can take a look at any particular call here, and when I click on this, I'll get the details of the call. And then I have a recordings tab here because I do have the Brightmetrics call recording integration enabled. So I can come over here, and again, I have the ability to play that recording through the browser or download that call recording, if I want to. And again, there's options to control, through Brightmetrics, who has access to what call recordings. Once again, it goes back to those call recording profiles and the player options there, and who we allow to view and delete call recordings. Also comes through to Brightmetrics and who is allowed to view those call recordings here. So that's the end of what I had to show you today on the Mitel call recorder. We do have the floor open to any questions if you have any. If not, I have just a few minutes before the top of the hour, give you guys back a few minutes of your day. Thank you for attending.
Thank you again, Steve. Hopefully everybody took away some great details from this. Just wanted to remind everybody our next webinar is going to be on June 17th for our Mitel training. It's going to cover enterprise contact centers. Mike DeFilly is going to be covering that one. And then just after that, we're also going to have a partner, DVS Analytics. They cover kind of automations for contact centers. We thought that would be a great takeaway from that ECC webinar. So that's going to be how to boost productivity on contact center automation, and that's going to be on June 22nd at 2 p.m. Okay, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the webinar. Thank you, everybody. It doesn't look like anybody has any questions. Thank you again, Steve, and we'll see you next month.